everyone, and welcome to the Creative Confidence Podcast, where we talk to subject matter experts about creativity, leadership, innovation, and growth. I'm Colita Stafford, an Executive Design Director at IDOU. And I already see we have an amazing, lively group of people from all around the world joining us. Thank you. As you join, please drop in the chat where you're joining us from. And for those of you who are new, we will open up the last portion of our podcast for Q&A. So start thinking of your questions. I am so excited for today's conversation. We are welcoming a longtime friend of IDEO and an amazing speaker and researcher and thought leader in the topic of curiosity. Welcome, Scott Shigeoka.
Yay.
Actually, I'm going to do
No,
this again.
that was right.
Okay. Here's Scott. Part of being curious is making sure that you honor and value people. So I wanted to make sure I said your name well. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Thanks for honoring it. I appreciate that. And you did. You did great.
Okay. Thanks. So today, obviously, we're talking about curiosity, in particular, how it can be a catalyst for transformation, how it can help to build understanding, create more meaning in our life and work, and create cultures where people feel like they matter. We're also going to talk about why curiosity is a business imperative, especially for leaders today. And all of this is very much anchored in Scott's latest work, which is a new book called Seek: How Curiosity Can Transform Your Life. I have it too.
It's real. It's a book.
Mine's marked up.
There you go.
Hopefully you know yours well enough you don't have to mark it up. How can transform your life and change the world. So for those of you who are joining, I have a starter question. Scott and I would love to know, where do you wish people would practice more curiosity? So in particular, here's the sentence. I wish people were more curious when it comes to blank. I would love to hear you share where you think curiosity would benefit at work, in your community, in your family. You tell us where. And while you're doing that, I'm going to share Scott's full bio. He has loads of stories and research. Scott is an internationally recognized curiosity expert, speaker, and author, recent book. He's known for translating research into strategies and actions that promote positive well-being and connected relationships. Scott does this at places like UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center and groundbreaking courses happening right now at University of Texas at Austin. He's been a speaker at numerous big and small companies, including Google, Microsoft, Pixar, Meta, Airbnb, as well as universities and schools around the world. And Scott is a good friend and alum of IDEO. I've had the privilege of being in a room with you, Scott. And Scott, you are the type of person who just lights up an entire room. So I'm so excited that we get to share you with a whole IDOU audience today. All right,
I'm
Scott.
so excited. Thank you. And I would say the same about you. I'm going to mirror you as well. You are so lovely to be in a room with, Co.
So let's spread this to more people around the globe.
Yes,
Yeah. All right.
yes.
So I'm gonna. What are some of the ways where we're hearing people wish there was more curiosity in their life? What are we seeing here?
I'm seeing a lot from like long-term relationships, which is great. It's a big focus, whether that's friendships. I'm seeing marriages,
Yeah.
coworkers, the folks that we spend lots of time with every day and every week. I'm seeing a lot about that. What about you, Co? What are you seeing?
And I'm seeing a couple things around just the state of the world, misled by misinformation, like not being curious about the facts that come to us or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me, I'm going to keep looking. I'd be curious for you, Scott. So in this book, you've had quite a journey in your own experiences around practicing curiosity. Do you have a story, that led to or was part of this book of where you really practiced curiosity, and what was the outcome of it? What happened because you did that?
Yeah. And so curiosity, we define it as, the pursuit of knowing or the search to understand. And a lot of times we're thinking about curiosity as this intellectual tool. How do I Wikipedia something or read or listen to a podcast or read a book, to learn more about something. And that's great.
Yeah.
But what I also think about when I think of curiosity is moving it from the head into the heart. So how do you really think about heart-centered curiosity as well, which is curiosity, the desire to know someone, so that it can be a force of connection. So the story that comes to mind is really about heart-centered curiosity. And I think about my own journey of being a kid in Hawaii. I saw there's a couple of people from Hawaii. So I a high school grad. I like grew up in Oahu and multiple generations. I'm Yonsei. And I grew up in a part of Christianity in my family that had really beautiful, rich traditions and
Okay.
rituals and connection. And I learned a lot about my connection to the divine, but it also was not affirming to my sexuality. I identify as a queer person and
Okay.
moving through the world. And that created, and my story is not unique in that way. There's many queer people who have had a similar experience in their faith backgrounds. That led to a feeling of like self-hatred and shame. And I prayed to be straight, and I didn't want this life for me. And when I started to come out and started to accept who I was, something really dark happened, which was I started to move away from my desire to love and to create belonging, and I would actively discriminate folks who
Mm.
identified as Christian because it reminded me of the pain and the suffering that I went through. And I was very mean and very othering. I would cancel people, online and in person who identified as Christian. And it wasn't until someone was curious towards me and said, what happened? And I'm Christian and we're not all the same. And actually, I'd love for you to come to my church and see how things are different. And because we had a relationship established, we worked together for a really long time. I went to the church and I saw a pride flag hanging from the front door, and I was greeted, and who I was felt affirmed. It was like a totally different experience than what I'd remembered growing up. And I learned this valuable lesson that just because two people share the same identity, whether it's Christian or Republican, or we're both 40 or whatever it is, we are
Yeah.
very different. We're very nuanced. So that was like a big lesson for me. It was, how do I see people's individuality and not just see the group they're a part of, and actively operate from my own pain and harm and try to other them or cancel them.
That is such a beautiful story. Thank you, Scott. Thank you for being so vulnerable. And I think that's in present in so many parts all throughout your book. Like
Mhm,
it's not just a skill to be curious, it's also a skill to understand where your biases or
mhm,
your beliefs are getting in your way of being
mhm,
curious.
mhm.
And so
Yeah.
let's talk about that. Thank you for modeling that. Okay. So one of the things you talk about in your book is this idea of deep versus shallow curiosity.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Um, can you tell us more about what the difference is and why that matters?
Yeah, totally. So again, I'm from Hawaii, so I always think
Okay.
about like the ocean, the
Hmm.
going to the beach, and the ocean is really similar to curiosity, right?
Mm.
Curiosity is on a spectrum, just like the ocean is. You have the shallow end and then you have the deep end, right? So the shallow end of curiosity is, how do we get to know someone, but more on the sort of like high level,
This,
shallow data points we might typically ask, like what's your name? Where do you live? Where did what do you do for work? What's your position there? What high school did you graduate from? That's like a big one in Hawaii.
yep.
And then
Oh.
as you move, towards the
Hmm.
deep end of the spectrum,
Hmm.
you start to get deeper. You dive beneath the surface. You start to see a person and all of their layers. You start to hear more stories. You start to understand their values, their relationships,
Yeah.
both their positive and their negative emotions. You see more of them. You penetrate the layers of who they are and reach the soul. And
Like
that's
what's
what
an
I think
example of like a deep question?
deep question or deep
Yeah.
curiosity question might be, instead of what's your name, it might be, what's the story of your name? Who
Mm.
named you? What's your relationship to those who named you? Do you like your name? What would you name yourself if you could? Um, Instead of what do you do for work, right? Or how do you make money? It could be, what's really energizing you right now at work, or what's the intention you're setting for yourself this year as you think about your professional journey, or who are the folks in your life that have really helped you get to where you are today that you're really grateful for, right? Like that gives
Yeah.
you so
Yeah.
much more detail of who this person is, and it brings you closer to that person. So that's the difference. And shallow's not bad, right? You don't necessarily want to go up to someone for the very first time at a conference and say, what's the deepest childhood trauma you've ever experienced? Go, like that. You have to start from a place of trust, and you have to slowly work your way up from the shallow to the deep end. And it's a gateway. It's an opening.
That's that's an important, you hit on a couple multiple important things, but I just want to like building up trust
Yeah.
and the big idea behind deep is connection. So let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that in particular
Yeah.
at business. So
Mm,
one of the things I've learned from you is curiosity is one of the single most important values or
yeah,
skills of a leader,
yeah,
especially in business contexts. Can you tell us why? Why do you believe that?
yeah. Not
What do you
only,
know about research? Like, what do we
yeah.
know about this?
Yeah, not only does the research show that curiosity helps you to live longer, it helps you to reduce feelings of anxiety and depression, it helps you to strengthen
Mm,
relationships, which are all incredibly important in and out of work. But in the work context specifically, curiosity is so important. We know when you have
yeah.
curiosity as a leader and you're intellectually humble, or in other words, you understand that there's constraints to your knowledge. So you have to work with others, listen to others, you don't know it all. You're not 100% certain 100% of the time. When leaders embody that kind of curiosity, they're more liked, that people want to work with you, and you're also seen as more competent as a leader. And so I think that's a big fear that folks have is, oh, if I ask a lot of
Mm,
questions or if I do a lot of this like exploration, well, folks think that I don't know what I'm doing. And it's quite the opposite, the research shows. And it makes sense. We don't want to work with someone that is a know-it-all. We don't want to work with someone that feels like they have all the answer and is leading us down a dead end, right? So I think it's so, so important. The best leaders in my
yeah.
experience, as I look out and have surveyed and interviewed tons of leaders across every industry, they all have this fundamental muscle of curiosity. And that's the other
Mm,
thing. It's a muscle.
mm,
It is something that we
mm,
practice every single day
mm.
in our work. And
Yeah.
that's what allows people to feel close to us, to feel seen and heard and valued. More curious cultures in work tend to have lower turnover rates. They tend to have more engaged workers, less
That's fascinating.
absenteeism. I mean, like that's the kind of culture that folks want to show up to because people are curious about me. They
Yeah.
care about my contributions. They value me. And that's really what is at the heart of curiosity.
Ugh. So it's so wonderful. And I love how you connect it to both not only how the leader is seen, but then the halo effect of what it
Mhm.
means in terms of the culture. People
Yeah,
feel
exactly.
seen. They feel like yeah, there's more connections, all those things. Okay, and you did talk too about it being a muscle. I'm going to dig into that in a moment. But first, yeah. Is there any other stories? Just I want to hang on this for a moment around
Mhm.
the work context or professional context. Any other stories of like the value of being a curious leader? How does that show up? What
Yeah.
does that do?
Yeah, there's like two that comes to mind. One
Hmm.
is, I was interviewing the folks at Pixar, who I've worked with,
Mm,
and they have this really beautiful model with their films, for instance, where when they're ready to do a review, they don't just invite the animators or the writers into the room, they're inviting everyone into the room. And so you could be
okay.
working in HR or accounting or talent or, whatever you're a receptionist, whatever it is. You get to be a part of the review process because the idea is that you're not so close and proximate to it. So you might see things that the folks who are core might not see. And the second thing is we all are story beings. Like we all know how to resonate and be emotional with stories. We all have, everyone that's working at Pixar like loves stories. That's why you're there. And so there's so much value that
Yeah.
comes from Bob in accounting or, Jem, who's like the receptionist, who has brilliant ideas, brilliant, brilliant ideas. So it's that question of like, who else could we be inviting into this, process of, feedback or getting, sort of ideas from? Because sometimes we limit ourselves and we
Yeah.
say we only need to like have the executives in the room, or you only need to have the board in the room to solve these problems, when there might be people who have great ideas and are more
Yeah.
proximate to the problems itself. And then another example
Yeah.
is, when folks are, I remember interviewing folks and they'll say, oh, I was like in this team meeting and then I was asking all these questions, I was being curious, but then I developed this story in my head
Mm,
that I'm talking too much or I'm being nosy. So I like quieted down. And then, my manager at the time reached out to me and said, hey, I just saw that, you were asking all these great questions and being so curious, and then you quieted down, is everything okay? I just wanted to check up on you. And that was that manager expressing their curiosity and care, right, towards someone on their team. And that person felt so seen and so valued and appreciated. And they were like, okay, it's okay for me to be myself and to be curious in this setting. Like that is actually adding value. And that's a more quiet way, quiet
mm,
leadership style
mm.
of, creating a culture of curiosity that I love.
Oh, that's so tangible. I feel like I can start practicing these things today.
Yeah.
We're gonna, this is, so you brought up something I'd love to hear a little bit more too. You said, like the Pixar example, bringing others in the room. I think it is easy to just assume
Yeah.
or just kind of go with what's known. And so it connects to like things that get in the way of us being
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah.
So work constraints, time, but what are some other things? What gets in the way of us
Yeah.
being curious? It seems like it comes so easy to use, Scott. So I think it's a
Mhm.
little bit, I'm trying to understand for those who maybe this feels scary or this feels hard.
I mean, that's
Why?
how I feel when I go into like a weight room and I'm like, I don't know how they're lifting that like thing, but they make it look so easy. And again, it's a muscle, right? They've been doing it
Okay.
for a
Yeah,
really
yeah,
long time and
yeah.
I'm new to, and I've been doing curiosity work for a long time. I think the big thing to sort of remember here is that one thing that really gets in the way is judgment. So we feel
Mm,
like, no, my point of view is actually more important, or I'm really certain about something, right? We see this a lot in like the political arena, for instance, or in our interpersonal relationships, right? If we are coming from a place of judgment or wanting our own points of view to be really heard, that's going to get in
mm.
the way of our curiosity. It's going to be very hard for us to access curiosity. I
So
think another example is
right.
fear. Sometimes we're
Mhm.
really afraid if I start getting curious about this with my, teenager, or my colleague, or my, romantic partner, what's going to happen in that conversation? Am I going to hear something that I might not want to hear? I mean, it even just the unknown can be really scary for folks, but it is so, so important for us to be curious because oftentimes we're operating from a place of assumptions, right? And we so
Right.
we operate from fear and we don't have that conversation. And then a year later we realize, oh my gosh, they weren't even thinking those things, or we're going to say those things that we were afraid of, and that the unknown was actually not so scary. It opened up possibilities to transform our relationship, to transform us. And sometimes curiosity takes us to hearing things we don't want to hear, but are actually really important for us in our
Yeah.
lives to hear to move forward. So, and I know many people probably have stories that they are like streaming through their head. I know it is for me on when that's happened. So those are some big ones. I think one we don't really talk about is
Mhm.
trauma.
Mm,
That's
mm.
I've talked to a lot of trauma informed therapists for this book, and when you are really traumatized, you went through a really hard interpersonal or situational experience that has sort of scarred you. And trauma is different, right? It's not like a broken bone where you can just like heal it and move on. It really stays inside of you. And if let's say you had a really hard romantic relationship that was very like traumatic and
Sure.
abusive maybe, or a
Yeah.
work context that was very abusive or toxic, stepping into that next relationship or that next work environment with curiosity can be really, really hard. So the
Thank you.
recommendation is to heal, to really do that work with, professionals or folks who can support you on that healing journey so that you can slowly open back up and be curious again. And Kevin Becker, who's a therapist, once said, curiosity is the barometer of healing. So in other words, when you
Mm.
start to get curious again in a space that you were once traumatized in, that means you've healed. Like you are on the other side of that healing journey. And that's like so, I love that so much. It makes my heart so warm and so cared for. I'm like, okay, that's what I'm gonna look for the next time I
Oh,
enter a space.
that's so, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's, and I know people resonate, that resonate, it's an important acknowledgement.
Yeah.
So what about the other end of things? So if there's things that get in the way, can you do too much? Can you be too curious? Are there boundaries we should think about too? Like
Oh,
I'm looking
yeah.
at, okay, so somebody asked for curiosity to be effective, does it need to be somewhat focused? Or
Mhm.
yeah, are there limits to curiosity, Scott?
Yeah, there's definitely limits and boundaries to curiosity. It's not just go out and, ask all the questions that you want, because
Hmm.
that might be invasive. It might be
Hmm.
harmful. You might be curious about someone's hair or someone's culture, whether they're pregnant or not, right? But you're not necessarily entitled to that information because you're curious. People have, privacy and boundaries that they, rightfully should enforce, and you should respect that. And so I think a good way to remember this is that curiosity is earned. It is not deserved.
Yeah.
Curiosity is earned. It is not deserved. So in other words, you have to create the trust and the relationship to allow for curiosity to take place, and don't expect it everywhere you go, right? And expect that you're going to get answers. But I think there's another side to that, which is
Mm,
I'd also want people to be courageous, right? Because I don't want you to just stick on the shallow side of curiosity. I want you to go to that deep end. So that's why, in the book, I write about the importance of self-compassion and grace, right?
mm,
Sometimes we might say something that, oh my gosh, it like was not the right question to ask in that moment. And I saw them kind of clamming up. Well, be kind to yourself, recognize your humanity, recognize that's an experience others have also had, and express that self-compassion to yourself. And in the reverse, if someone asks you a question
Mm,
that feels like it's, going
it's too
across a
much.
boundary,
Uh-huh.
you can extend grace to them and,
Mm.
say, hey, their intent is probably coming from a really good place. The impact of that was really hard for me, but, I want to just extend grace to them and know that, sometimes we're fallible, we're humans, we make mistakes. And so I'm going to still, operate from a place of love and continue on with this conversation and this relationship.
So good. As I'm nodding half the time, which people can't, hear on a podcast. But I just want to put one of the things I really enjoyed about your book is you do take what seems like it could be a simple topic,
Mm,
curiosity,
mm,
and really, really unpack the nuance of what makes it meaningful.
mm.
Like the point you just said, it's earned, not not deserved. And just even going back to the shallow versus deep, you've really helped me see something I thought I understood in a whole different way, in a much more nuanced human way. And I love too how you bring in all your expertise, stories of your own personal experience with research. There's a
Mm.
lot of research on
Yeah,
this
a lot.
with
Yeah.
best practices from therapy and the wellness circles. It's just one more reason why I love the book so much because
Oh,
there's
thanks,
a
Ko.
lot of layers to this. There's a lot of
Yeah.
nuance. So, Scott, you got to help us all in how to practice this now. Okay. Okay. So we get why it's important. Let's talk about, I know you really want us to be able to practice this. So you said it's a muscle.
Yeah.
Is this something that anyone can learn? Is it trainable? Can we get better at it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's start there.
Yeah, it absolutely is a must. So it's something that we consistently practice. So first of all, I want to say we have curiosity. Thank you to our ancestors for that because they needed someone in a group to be curious
Okay.
so they could find
Uh-huh.
water or so they could find
Uh-huh.
food or so they could, learn how to create tools or, we anyone who's, has children or has been around children, you see curiosity in action in the development stages, right? You see a kid babbling, they're like, wow, ooh, like they're saying all these like words because they're getting curious about their vocal
Uh-huh.
anatomy. They're
Mm.
learning, oh, if I say certain things, I can get responses from the adults or the people around me, right? And that's all a part of this learning mechanism. Curiosity is so important for learning and for growth. So one of the things that I like to say is we are all born with curiosity. And we know that actually because
Yeah.
infants look at novel stimuli for much longer than known ones. We know that from the research.
Mm.
We know when we put folks under an fMRI, a functional MRI, and we ask them to be curious, they're releasing dopamine, the neurotransmitter that we release when we eat a tasty meal or we, have sex or we do things that we want behaviors we want to incentivize because it's important for our survival or for us to thrive. Curiosity is no different. So I'd like to say, yes, it's a muscle, but it's something you're born with. You have it. It's like
Mhm.
creativity. We talk about this with
Yeah.
creativity. You have curiosity. It is inside of you. And the other piece is it just requires practice, like any other muscle that you don't want to atrophy. You just have to continue to exercise it in little or small ways. And that doesn't mean going out and expressing curiosity to all the people around you. There's other directions of curiosity. For instance, inward, right? You can get curious about what's inside of you as a place to start and get familiar with it, and then move your way out to
Well,
who's around you.
let's go there. That sounds like a really
Yeah,
safe, good starting place.
yeah.
What is it? How do you practice like internal in looking?
Mm.
How did you frame it?
Yeah, inward
Inward. Okay.
curiosity.
How do
Yeah,
you practice it? And
yeah.
can you give us a couple strategies or tips of how we can practice it?
Yeah, totally. So one of the I put a lot of practices in the book because I didn't want to just be like, be curious. Okay, bye. Like I wanted to make sure Seek had real activities and
Yeah.
practices and exercises that you could do at home or at work. And so one of them that comes to mind, so I love officiating weddings. It's one of my favorite things to do. If anyone else has officiated a wedding, the distinct honor of being up there with, two people you love and just watching this super important ceremony and ritual, unfold, before your eyes. It's such an incredible experience. I highly recommend it for anyone who loves love like I do. But one of the things I do as an officiant, because we know we're going to have the vows that you give to the other person. I vow to do this for you. But another thing that I mentioned to folks before we get to the ceremony is, what's the vow that you would make to yourself, right? Like to
Mm,
show up, so that you can take
mm,
care of yourself to show up as best as you
mm.
can for your partner, for your kids, for the people around you. What are the vows you're making to yourself? not just to
Mm.
your partner. And I have them write this down and, kind of read it out to each other, before the big day, like, many, many days before the big day. And something that I put in the book is that we can do the same thing before any big transition, right? Let's say we're, getting married, welcoming a new child, whether we're, moving into a new job, transitioning to a new place, we're moving somewhere, right? These are kind of big milestone moments in our lives where we really want to get self-curious
Mm.
and understand, how are we going to show up for ourselves in this moment? How are we going to take care of ourselves? How are we going to, who are the people we want to surround ourselves with, who can be like a board of advisors for us as we make decisions? When things get really hectic and anxious, where will I go, or who will I talk to? It's like creating that sort of vow to yourself so that you can best prepare yourself, as you move into a big transitional moment. And many times we don't take that space to reflect and really get
Yeah.
self-curious and, think about how we're going to show up to ourselves. So I think that's a
Yeah.
really great practice to, to do.
That's a great one. And I'm looking at folks joining us today. We have several people who have, I keep this motto, this is on my desk, or I have this mindset, this mantra. I think that's a great place. So
Mm,
let's broaden that sphere a little bit to, do you have some guidance on how we can practice one-on-one? And there's
yeah.
one area actually I want to dig in with you, because
Mm,
I love this in the book. You talk about one of the kind of like enemies of curiosity is this idea of I think you say it's predatory curiosity.
yeah.
And I
Yeah.
interpreted that to mean like there's a underlying agenda. Like
Yeah.
my kids can detect this in me instantly. And so
Totally.
do you have guidance for how we can practice showing up with pure authentic
Yep.
curiosity?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, predatory curiosity. Thank you for bringing that out because it's so,
Uh-huh.
so important.
It
Predatory
is.
curiosity is exactly that. It looks like curiosity, right?
Uh-huh.
You're leading in, you're open-ended questions, you're asking in a conversation, but there's some kind of ulterior motive. There's an agenda underneath it, right? So
I
it's like
think
what a
leaders, I
prosecutor
think
does, a
leaders would,
detective does it.
yeah,
Leaders
yeah.
do this
Leaders
sometimes,
definitely do this. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Leaders do this too. They're asking questions to, try to get an organization or a team towards a particular direction. But that's not real curiosity, right? Real
No.
curiosity is you really don't know what you're about to encounter. You don't
Mm,
know what people are going to say. You don't know where the conversation is going to go, right?
mm,
And that is true curiosity when you're very open-hearted and you're really creating that space to not be driven by your own points of view, to show everyone how smart you are or like what direction you think we should go in, but instead are coming from a true place of questioning
yeah.
and exploration and discovery. And sometimes we do, sometimes folks are like, oh, I never do that. Like
Do you have
I don't ever do predatory curiosity, but it shows up in really subtle ways as well. So, there's a lot of different subtle examples of how that shows up in the work and outside of work. Yeah.
I love any last tip on how one can practice that? If you're like once you become aware of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one thing to recognize is it's really a self-awareness practice and then
Mm,
a framing practice. So what I mean by that is sometimes I wrote about this in, like the Harvard Business Review and Inc. magazine, just this idea that, we do something called supervisory gaslighting sometimes,
mm,
where, a team member will come in, let's say we're their supervisor or manager,
mhm.
and they say, oh my gosh, like I didn't do a great job. I failed, in that client meeting
Like,
and I'm so
yep.
sorry. And sometimes what we'll say as a manager is, no, no, you did great. Like I was there. I saw you. You like answered all the questions correctly. Like you did a really great job. The client's still signing with us. Like you did great. And that feels good to you. But what that actually is doing is it's saying to your team member,
Mhm.
you are wrong. The way you are
Mm,
seeing this experience that you were in and what you
mm,
articulated to me is wrong. And instead, I'm going to contradict you by saying another way to look at it. It deteriorates a person's confidence
mm.
because confidence is about trusting in the way that you see the world and move through the world, right? And we do this all the time. We do this as parents when our kid comes from like a practice or a game and they think they did a bad job. And we like close the door to connection. And we say, don't think about it in that way. You did a
Mm.
great job moving on. But that can stampede over people's
You said like close the connection.
yeah, it
Oh,
closes the connection. It stampedes over their feelings. And
mhm,
instead, what I recommend is for folks to say, you know, like I didn't think that you felt, but I really want to understand from your
mhm.
perspective, like why do you feel that way? Tell me more. Tell me more is so, so helpful because it
Mhm.
opens the door for them to share a bit more about their own perspectives. And we know that reflection in that way
Yep.
is really helpful for someone's growth. And we might learn, oh my gosh, the way they're defining failure is so different from me. Like their failure is growth mindset, my failure is
Mm,
catastrophic. Or
right.
you hear, oh wow, like they do have this self-critical voice that's in their head, and at least now they have an outlet to actually talk about it, and you can address it with more concrete detail rather than like assuming that you know something about them and saying, don't think about it that way, like think about it this way instead.
Yeah.
So tell me more, I think is like a really, really great
Yep.
framing to open someone up and keep that door
Yep.
open for connection.
Yep. Ugh, I love, tell me more. Three great words.
Yeah.
I love the, when someone asks a question, why do you ask that? To,
Mm,
to
mm,
understand the impetus behind it. They're
mhm.
probably not, because there's been so many times I'll answer it and it's
Yeah.
not what they were even interested
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
So it helps
Totally.
me understand where they're coming from. Yeah.
Totally. Totally love that.
So Scott, this has been amazing. We want to go to some questions. Are you up for that?
Oh my gosh, yes. I'm so excited to answer
There's
questions.
there's so
I love the
many.
chat, by the way. I'm really digging everyone's reflections. I'm reading all the things that people are saying in response. I love it so much.
So yeah, if there's one you want to pull in, but I have a couple to start.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
So start with this one. It has to do with hiring.
Yeah.
So hiring and HR practices. So let's see here. Um, do you think that curiosity is currently considered in the HR hiring processes, in
Mm,
particular non-creative roles?
mm,
So
mm.
I'm just, yeah. Is this
I think,
something,
yeah,
and how, and what, and if it's not, like, what does that reinforce in the culture?
I think curiosity is an incredibly important skill and value to orient towards for hiring. Who do you want to work with? Well, curious people, again, tend to be, better and easier to work with. They're better collaborators. The research shows they're more creative, they're more innovative. They tend to be more emotionally resilient. Again, that reduction in anxiety and depression. There's a lot of benefits to curiosity, strengthening relationships. So I think it's really good to look for that in those that you're hiring. And it also means that, because in this ever-changing world with like technology and like all of these advancements, what's going to become really important, for instance, in AI, is your ability to be curious. Like, what kinds of prompts are you asking? How are you framing
Mhm.
questions? That curiosity is going to become even more important of a currency. And I look out at the world today, both from a society level and from a business level, and I see a lot of the rupture that's happening and a lot of the
Mhm.
distrust that's happening, a
Mhm.
lot of the power dynamics that are unfolding and not being addressed, a lack of equity. I mean, all of that stems from curiosity, right? I talk to
I know.
D&I
Yep.
officers all the time. They're like, curiosity is a lens in order to bring diversity, inclusion, and equity into our work. I talk to business leaders. They're like, curiosity is the engine to our R&D and to learning about what else goes on in the world. Curiosity is so important for people management. Like literally, you could look in any part of a business, and curiosity is so, so crucial. So that's why I think it's
That's
the most important skill and something to really look for when you're hiring for
Yeah.
someone.
And just building on that, a little more nuance was a listener says, it's definitely not considered in my company as it's
Yeah.
difficult to measure.
Mm, mm,
And you gave so many examples though of like we do understand the research shows things
yeah.
like employee engagement, turnover,
Yeah.
feelings of belonging. And so these are some, not all of them, some of them are harder to measure, but they're the intangibles that actually, we had a recent guest on, Bob Sutton, who talks about organizational debt.
Mm,
And
mm,
if you're not accounting for these things over time, your organization takes on more debt and becomes harder and harder to
mm,
correct
mm,
or
mm,
or solve for these things. So
mm. I mean, my
interesting. Oh,
yeah, my response to that is that, I always think about what is the impact of curiosity? And in this case, it's, do people feel seen and valued in your
hmm.
organization? Do they feel like when they are making a contribution, it is recognized, it's appreciated, it's acknowledged? Do folks feel like they can work with people well in their organization because people want to hear from them and there's great listening happening, which is, totally a cousin of curiosity, active listening. I think I would like measure for those because if you see that there's a lack of belonging, if you see there's a lack of listening, if you see that there's a lack of creativity, I mean, curiosity is the engine to get those levels back up, right? So knowing where the practice of curiosity is taking you, like where you're steering the ship, is really, really helpful to know if you're
I
thinking about
love
measurement.
that. Love that. Okay, different question. You brought it up a little bit already. Let's talk about the role of curiosity in innovation and creativity.
Mm,
So
mm,
you mentioned it is curiosity we're all born with it. We're all born with
yeah.
it. We can all get better. Um, so yeah, what do you see as the relationship between curiosity and creativity? This comes from Karen.
Yeah, it's so linked, it's creativity and curiosity go hand in hand. I mean, as a writer, for instance, I'm working on a movie script, I'm working on a theater piece, I have this book out, and anytime I get a blockage in my creativity, I'm like, oh my gosh, I really don't know what to
Mm,
write right now. I'm like feeling like I'm stumbling. Whenever I get curious about anything, literally, I could go out and do what's called a curiosity walk, 10 minutes. I used to live in Joshua Tree, so I would take 10 minutes and go in the high desert and just get curious about all the little creatures or the plants that are around me. Or even now in the Bay, I can, go around and just go to a park or just, observe my neighbors, say hi to them, acknowledge them. That curiosity actually awakens my creativity. It gets me unstuck, right? It allows my
mm,
writer's block to just like shoes away, and then I can just get back into the stream of consciousness of things, And I think the same is true in creative projects. If you're ever feeling like there's some kind of wall in your creativity, or you feel like, oh my gosh, like we're not feeling like we're getting the creative juices going, assign some kind of curiosity adventure that you can give to your team to get them looking out or looking
yeah.
inward, right? So that they can use the experience and the benefits of being curious, and transform that into creativity that, they can harness with each other. I think that's the best way to think about it.
Yes, I'm gonna connect it to one of your friends and colleagues as well, Keith Yamashita. So Keith
Yeah,
is an
yeah,
amazing transformational leader,
yeah.
writer, and he was on our podcast and he talks about he did an entire segment with us
Mm,
on sparking inspiration and creativity. So
mm,
uh,
mm,
I definitely recommend that if people want to go deep on that. Check out Keith Yamashita.
absolutely.
Uh, okay, one more. We have time for at least one more. You're gonna love this one. Shutting curiosity down. So this
Mm,
comes from Braden and Braden. Any suggestions for someone working for someone who seems to head off curiosity at every
mm.
attempt?
Mhm,
It's
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I totally that's a common experience, not just in work, but sometimes in our relationships, we can feel like we are always the ones being curious, and where is that is that gonna ever, shift? Are the tides gonna shift? I think one thing that's really important to remember is that the research shows that curiosity is contagious. And so
mm,
we
great
know
point.
that when you are curious yourself, right? You're going to a family reunion, there's going to be politically different folks in the family that are coming together, or maybe you're going to a work meeting and everyone has very different views on how to solve a problem at work or to approach a project. When you bring your own curiosity and you're really listening and taking in what other folks have to say, that does, encourage others to be curious as well. And I think we've all had this experience where we go into a conversation and we start getting curious and they start getting curious and
Mhm.
asking us questions. And it's just like, what researcher Todd Kashdan calls like the spiral give and take. It's like this, okay, yeah, cool. Like we're
I
going
got
back and forth with our curiosity. Yeah,
It's like jumping on a trampoline when you're both jumping and
totally,
you both like get a
totally,
little higher and you don't want somebody
totally.
who's not jumping. That's
Yeah.
not fun.
Yeah. It's or like pickleball. Like that's a modern example, where it's like hitting the pickleball back and forth. It's like, so I think that's such a great thing to hold on to, that when
Mhm.
I am curious, like that could spark curiosity in others. And I went for 12 months around the country, going to places that were very different from me, living in spaces I'd never been before. And that's what I saw. When I got curious about them, whether it was at
Mhm.
a Trump rally, a mega church, living in rural Appalachia, in the South, folks opened up back to me and they asked me
Yeah.
questions and I got to share my own story. So that's the first thing. Second thing to remember is that when you are curious it's to remember a difference in reciprocity. So there's something called general reciprocity and specific reciprocity. So specific reciprocity is transactional, basically. It's like, I'm curious with you, so you are going to be curious with me back, right? It's like, I give you $1, you give me $1 back. Like it's very transactional. But I like to operate from general reciprocity, which is that if I'm curious towards you, maybe through that experience, you're going to be curious towards someone else. And I may never see you be curious towards someone else in the organization, but I know that the work that I did to be curious might have a ripple effect outward, right? So the general reciprocity is more transformational, it's less transactional, and that gives me a lot of solace too. But the third thing to remember is, again, the boundaries that sometimes, when
Yeah.
you're putting all this investment in and you're being really curious and you're really trying to engage with someone, you just might not be getting anything back to a point where it's harmful, that it's actually affecting your health or your well-being or the well-being of those you love. And I talk in the book, Seek, that there are times when you have to go no contact. And that's really, really hard.
Mm,
Or you have to move
mm,
out of that situation to a new one. And that's a
mm,
really, really hard thing to do, but it's so important for us to set those boundaries to protect ourselves and those we love. All I'm saying is that we need to expand the length of time, because what I'm seeing right now is
mm,
folks hear something they don't like, or and they say, okay, I'm going to cancel you, or I'm going to like block you on Instagram or Facebook or never talk to you again. Like what would happen if we just got a
mm,
little more curious and expanded the amount of time that we could explore that, right? And I'm not saying don't ever go no contact or don't ever switch to a different culture that works, and that makes you feel safe, etc. It's just like let's at least try to see if there's a way that we can be in relationship with one another and create some kind of understanding even across our differences.
that ties so well to where we started today, just with all the examples of where people wish curiosity was practiced. I think
Yeah.
that's a great, like, just how can we expand the amount of time?
Yeah.
Okay, so Scott and everyone listening, we are out of time. Speaking of time, I
Nah.
can't, I can't expand it. So I'm going to try to wrap up. I
Okay.
have one last question for you, Scott, but you get a moment to think on it.
Okay.
I love to just end with, what advice would you give yourself at an earlier stage in your career? So while you
Mm.
think on that, let me wrap up. So
Okay.
thank you everyone for joining us. We've been talking with Scott Shigeoka around curiosity. And in particular, some of the things we've been talking about is how curiosity is a skill that anyone can practice. It's a muscle we can train, we can learn. Tons of advice in Scott's book, Seek: How Curiosity Can Transform Your Life and Change the World. You
Mm.
can find that on Amazon. You can also find it at Scott's website. Uh, we'll put the link in the chat, scottshigeoka.com. He's also, as you can tell, an amazing speaker. So you can also reach out to Scott there for speaking engagements. We've also been talking about the specific skill of deep curiosity and how that is important for business and leadership. It can make you a more effective leader, and it can lead to higher performing teams.
Mhm.
And to, more importantly, I'd say people feeling valued and connected and that they belong. So if you want to find out more, I welcome you to check out Scott's book. If you want to find out more too about learning and how you can think creatively, we've talked about some of that today. I would love for you to check out some of our courses at idou.com. I'm most excited. We have a new course launching in just a few months. It's coming in March, and it's called Creative Thinking for Complex Problem Solving. It's designed to equip, same as Scott. It's designed to equip you with actual tools and techniques that you can apply. Uh, for example, it'll help you approach complex problems with out-of-the-box thinking, and how you can develop reliable ways to navigate the twists and turns of a complex problem. So you can find out more about that at idou.com/creative thinking. And with that, Scott, back to you. Take us home. Advice for a younger Scott.
I think I, would tell them, especially because younger Scott was in a lot of environments where power was real. And I think you
Mm,
can't talk about curiosity without talking about power dynamics and power. The direction of curiosity really matters. And so we know from the research, when you have more social power and more social capital, it's more important for you to be curious. When you have less social power and less social power, capital, it's more important for you to do what's called perspective giving, to share your stories, to share your perspectives, because they aren't often heard in like the dominant culture or narrative, right? There's other voices and other stories that are heard more often. So that's why curiosity becomes even more important. So I would say share your story. It is so, so important, younger Scott, to get out there to, share your perspective and to know that others, when they listen and when they are curious towards you, they're going to benefit so much from hearing your perspective. And it's gonna shake up in a good way their own understanding of the world so that they too can
amazing.
grow. So almost like giving younger Scott that agency and that empowerment to like be really proud and like to be really confident in sharing their stories.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Scott. One of our listeners couldn't have said it better. This has been so uplifting.
Thank you so
Yes,
much, everybody. Please reach out. One of my favorite things to do is to be curious about people. So please reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Mahalo
And
nui
bye.
loa. Thank you so much, everyone.